Stephen, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you here today. Stephen comes from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, and he's the Chief Information Security Officer. And how long have you been there with the University of Arkansas?
Just about 5 years.
5 years. Okay. Okay.
Oh,
I know
wow.
you came from the All States International in Houston, Texas, and how you were there for quite a while. And I noticed that you were the IT security strategy manager for 14 states and how many countries? 13?
So
14.
we had, so they were an oil and gas, they were a holding company for oil and gas companies. So we
Mhm.
had 50 sites. There were 50 sites. They were global. I mean, it was
Wow.
all over the world, China, Dubai, those kind of things.
Wow. Well, that brings us to our first question. I feel like that's a big difference from education to that. What's the biggest difference as your position in your current position there at University of Arkansas?
So I think, really the role transitioning from oil and gas into higher ed is much more of a transition from, the companies were similar. The company was similar to this in that we have lots of divisions in the university, and they're all individually managed as a silo and things like that. So there was a lot of similarity there. I think realistically, the main differences are that this is a state entity. It is not as cut and dry on ROI and things like that. There's also, I mean, our mission is to be open, and so that's a challenge. In my previous life, I was told by somebody who remained nameless, high up in the organization, that your job is to keep us out of the newspaper, right? That was their thing, and they were willing to take very minimal risks that exposed their identities and stuff like that. They really wanted to be very tight from a security perspective, whereas the university is much more open. I mean, again, they don't want to be hacked. They don't want their identity trashed or run through the the media, but they do. Our mission is to make Arkansas better. It is to spread knowledge around, and so we're much more open, process wise as well as information wise, as than say in the oil and gas space. And that's that fundamentally shifts what you do as a CISO.
Okay. And what about the difference being in different countries? Is cybersecurity realm about the same, even when you're crossing borders?
Well, I mean, if you do a lot, we do have the university has a small school annex in Rome, and
Okay.
so we do have some GDPR and stuff like that. Regulations and functionality in other countries, China and the Middle East, are very different than they are. North Africa is very different than it is in the United States, or in Rome per se. And so that there is a difference there as well, and the regulation that you have to track and follow and make sure that you're meeting.
Okay. That was interesting to me. And what about being in Texas versus Arkansas? Just as a personal note, which one do you like better?
Well, I'll tell you what. I grew up in Houston. I
I-
spent, well, I won't say how long I spent there. That would, that's something I shouldn't say. But I did grow up there and lived most of my life there. Moved to Arkansas, and so in Houston, it's a great city. It's a massive city. I mean, there's more people in Houston than there is in the entire state of Arkansas. And they have one season, and that is hot. And so one thing that I really love, that I've loved about moving to Arkansas, especially Northwest Arkansas, is the having four seasons. I didn't know that leaves change color in the winter. I mean, being in Texas, there were no leaves, didn't fall off the trees for that. And so, I mean, just the seasons and the environment, I've enjoyed that greatly.
Well, I've never been to Texas, so I guess I take our seasons for granted because that's my favorite. When the leaves change and all
Yeah.
those type things are changing. So,
Yeah, the Ozarks, uh, except for maybe the Adirondacks in New York. Those arcs are some of the best season changes when you go through and you're driving through up there. You go up through the Pig Trail and get to see them during the fall. It's beautiful. So,
absolutely.
Well, one of the questions that I was curious about is, what's your approach to risk management at a university where threats can come from so many sources? What we do at NSI, we work with a lot of higher educational institutions, and I have to admit, doing going from, if we're pen testing or if we're doing any type of red teaming project with a bank or a hospital, for example, those are so much more locked down than a university. So your attack vectors, even physically, are so different than something like that. So just kind of curious how you deal with risk management.
So realistically, I mean, there's a couple different ways that we kind of look at that. I mean, there's the older model of perimeter mixed with kind of zero trust. I know we have some projects coming up with you guys that are going down that pathway. I don't want to speak specifically in that, but, identifying those systems that have, the data that should not be shared, FERPA data, GLBA data, those kind of things. And then treating those differently than the general campus, because the general campus is, like you said, it's not a bank, it's BYOD, right? So students bring their Xbox. Yeah. There's 35,000 students that come and go from campus, and they bring their personal laptops, their Xbox. There are thousands of Xboxes and PlayStations and all of the different gaming systems on campus. There's tens of thousands of IoT devices that are not owned or managed by the university. The university is in itself is really, it's a giant city, right? We feed people. We've got housing. We've got food service. We have a police force. I mean, it operates very much like a city. And so from a risk management perspective, we try to pick out those things that contain the crown jewels, so to speak, in the risk parlance. We pick those things out, and then we make sure that we have appropriate controls and protections around those, and then we try to kind of keep the rest of the campus free and open, and then just kind of back a little bit from those as well.
Okay, very cool.
Well, what role do you see universities playing in shaping national cybersecurity policies or standards in the future?
Well, I mean, so outside of training the future IT people and cybersecurity people, I think that's where they're going to have their biggest impacts, is in that area right there. I think cybersecurity right now, we're in a really interesting time in cyber, even in the university space. I know that over the last 10 years, things have really shifted, and, there's been a lot of law put in place that make hold board of trustees responsible for the cyber posture of their corporate or their company. There are, laws about reporting and, paying fines and penalties for losing people's information. So this has really been ramping up over time, and it's getting to this place now where the federal government is trying in multiple different directions with CMMC and 800-171, the NIST standards, the cybersecurity framework. They're trying to do all of this stuff to try to get themselves, not only themselves, but people that they do business with and that they interact with, to get them to a kind of a common security posture. And so that's, I think that's really been pushing out there. That is, when that hits the university, because of our nature of being kind of open and the history of, the university system and how it's worked, that, I think that there's a lot of pushback in there. and I've been talking to a couple of my colleagues about this right now. We have this, on one hand, we have this push from the federal government to increase research, in the CHIPS and CHIPS Act and things like that, to increase research to bring technology back to the United States, manufacturing things back to the United States, and pushing through research. At the same time, they're increasing the cyber requirements around all of that type of research, any type of DoD, DOE research. There's really high bar on the cybersecurity. They're raising that bar almost on a daily basis, and at the same time, they're also reducing the funding side of that as well. And so we have a really interesting blend of how all of that comes together. And I think right now, it is kind of confusing, and everybody's trying to see their way. I think in the next 5 to 7 years, we'll kind of get that sorted out a little bit better and have a better understanding of how not only the federal government is going to protect itself, but also how it's going to, or how it's going to put requirements, what requirements it's going to put, and those type of things it's going to put on those people that it deals with.
Okay.
I know that's kind of a sidelong answer to that question.
No, I
I
enjoyed
think that's where, the pushback that we give, and the, where we're trying to hit, affordable security is kind of the mantra in the university space, more so than it is in corporate. I mean, I know they don't want to spend, they're looking at ROI and stuff like that, but in the risk acceptance and the risk tolerance components are much higher in higher ed right now.
Okay.
So this is probably a cybersecurity engineer's favorite question, but
Okay.
Have you ever been involved in an incident response of a cyber event? And if you have, which it's one of those things, you do it long enough, right? If you do it long enough, can you walk me through just kind of how intense that was? Because I kind of I've been through some of those with some of our customers. They brought us in and they became our customers. So I'd like to know kind of how intense that first day is, and then what are the first kind of 3 things that you recommend doing when you're in that type of situation?
So yeah, I've been in a couple. I guess I don't really want to talk too much about specifics of those. Just in
you don't even have to say the name of the organization. So
some of them were not with this organization. They were not with this organization. So I don't want to really call out other organizations, but I know that it was it's really interesting when I look back on it. It was such an interesting way that so I get a call, just to kind of high level a scenario. I get a call at night from a security engineer that one of our services, an exterior service, is not functioning, and that the enterprise team who manages the cloud presence was saying that it's acting very weird. And when you hear weird in the security business, that means you've got to start checking things.
Sure.
So that individual dived in to it, notified me that he was seeing some behavior that he could not account for. So we woke up the team. We weren't ready yet to declare an emergency, and so that was kind of concerning, but not too much. And it reminds me kind of an opening flower, because as you dig into that, all of a sudden we realized that there was a presence in there that they had foothold in that system. And so at that point, and this would go to the first thing that from our policy is to stop exfiltration, is to stop, whatever's happening. Is the first thing is to protect data and the organization. So we were shutting down the NATs for that. We were taking that thing and offlining that box so that it couldn't communicate out. And then we were looking for, we were looking at lateral movement right next
Right.
in there, while we've got one engineer pulling the box apart and going through autopsy and things like that, loading it up for forensics, while we're going through logs in the sim and looking for lateral movement. And then when you start to find that, things start to expand out, and and that just kind of amps up the level of intensity there, because once you see lateral movement, then everything is now in spec, right? So everything is now in play. And we did not have at that point a good timeline for how long they had been in there. So they could have been in there a while. And that would give them, because once they've got foothold, I mean, it's very difficult to keep lateral movement from happening. I mean, I know what the commercials for all the software out there says, but it is, there are 0-day exploits and things like that you just can't stop.
Right.
And so once they have foothold, then and you see lateral movement, then we're starting to kind of isolating, components, data center pieces and things like that in data centers, so that we can make sure that, if we find it in there, we can prevent it from spreading, and then tied it down. So it went from, just something that is weird and one of those things. So a little bit of, kind of, okay, well, let's see what's going on, to full charge, talking with the executives. Okay, this is what's going on. It's expanding. We're maintaining a front end presence, but right now we're taking certain systems offline, and we'll get them back on as fast as we can. We're looking for what was exfiltrated, and if anything was, and what type of data it was, what they were after. See if we could understand the intent of what they were doing in there as well. And so we were moving on that pretty fast, as fast as we can get it going. And so we did that. That was one of the events. And then one event was way, way, way back in the day. And I think it was much more of a fun event. It was it was probably 2012 or 2011. And it was one of the first ransomware variants. And somebody had brought their personal workstation to work. And maybe it was even before 2011, but they had brought their personal laptop to work, had put it on the network, and had connected it up to one of the file servers, had gotten access to one of the file servers. And all of a sudden we were, people were complaining about there was corruption on this file server. And it was one of the main file servers, a big file server for this company. And so we started looking at them, and they are all ended in a different, suffix on the end, meaning they were encrypted. And so then the idea became, okay, we knew what ransomware was at the time, and we were kind of like, okay, where is it coming from? And so we were disconnecting everybody, from them to try to determine who was actually doing that, because we weren't seeing appropriate identity on that, on the file that was being changed. So that didn't hit too much. I mean, we got that pretty quick just by the users complaining and stuff like that. And so that wasn't too horrendous, and we restored from backup, got them offline, and cleaned it up pretty well. But that was, a lot less intense. Let's put it that way.
Well, I know those can be, you can get some pucker factor in those moments, but yeah, it's, I think the last one I had, we had another university that we worked with, and they had a satellite campus, and their CIO, I think he called me like 5 a.m. and I was like, who is this? I answered the phone, and he was just like, hey, Rich, we have a bit of a problem. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he just starts going into it, and I'm just like, oh, and then I'm like suddenly awake. It's just like, I'm like, what's going on? Why? I didn't even realize what time. And then I was like, oh dear. So, but yeah.
I had, interesting, funny story like that. I had I worked for a company. I was the network and security manager for a company. And this was a long time ago, much longer back than that. And so I get a call it was our call service. It was about 3:30 in the morning, and I get a call, and the Dubai office was complaining that email was not working properly, and you couldn't get to one of the databases. And so I tried. I was like, well, okay, why? So why are they calling me? Because there was an on call and then a skip level manager below that, and so nobody had picked up, and it had finally gotten to me. And so I tried to get my laptop out and was trying to log in, and I couldn't get into anything. I could get through the firewall, but I couldn't get to anything. Nothing was working right. So I'm like going to drive into the data center, and it was attached to the office. I drive in and I walk in the door, and so there was 3 racks that had our sand cabinets in it. Wow. And a pipe had burst above the racks, and so there was water raining down on the sand. And I was kind of like, okay, it was a really surreal moment, because there's like, that was our whole sand, and for the time. And so all of that was off. It was just, it became the perfect time to test your DR plan.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We actually did that. We failed over. It took us about 8 hours to fail over to our DR site in Colorado. And we ran that way for about 6 months until we had everything, redone in our data center.
Please tell me you got to go on site to Dubai, though.
Yeah, well, sure. We went there a couple times. China as well. There was Russia. We had an office in Moscow in one of those.
That's cool.
It was always a lot of fun. Traveling could be, when you're younger. I mean, we had an office in Verschoten, just outside of, it was in the Netherlands, just outside of Amsterdam, which was also a fun office to go to.
Yeah, that would be very cool. We don't have as many offices where I work like that. So I keep telling our CFO we need to make some budget to go open up a brick and mortar, over in Dubai, but he's not buying it.
The office in Hawaii. That's what
man. Well, it's funny you say that. We've got I'm not going to mention their name, but we got a SI that we're potentially going to start partnering with, and like the contact that I talk to a lot, like her big project is they're doing a big project with the state of Hawaii. Ooh. And she's just always like, it's tough. I've got to go over there. I'm like, don't even go there. Don't say that. It's so hard. Yeah, it's tough. When I come back, I know. Francisco, I'm like, you are just you're saying that on purpose. But
yes, I'm sure.
Anyway.
I feel like when you have to travel for your job, it's not like glamorous as it sounds, probably. And then if you're on the other side of it, so. But I think I would like going to Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly. Like I travel all the time, but it's like Oklahoma, Mississippi, Texas. Nothing against Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Texas, but it's not Hawaii. I'm just going to tell you that.
No beaches, no sand. Well, this brings us to our next question. How do you see the role of the CISO evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, since cybersecurity is so top of mind right now?
Well, I don't, it is changing, and there's a lot of different CISO roles out there. I mean, when you look at it, each company needs their own different type of CISO, depending on what type of, security organization they have in the company, right? And so I think, over the next 5 years, I see it maintaining its current focus. At least I know we've got to work through. Right now, we're kind of in the AI hype cycle, and that is something that I think the CISO needs to, modern CISOs need to really be involved in and understand, and not just from, how do we use AI in the company? There's always that, but also AI attack. I mean, there's substantial changes in that going on all the time, and making sure that, that you have the right, really making sure that you have a very dynamic and appropriate security posture for your risk profile and for those, the profile of those who are attacking. And I think that's going to be that focus going forward.
On that note, and this kind of wasn't a planned question, but the SolarWinds CISO, right? Sure. I'm curious how now he ended up. I think the judicial system or the judge dismissed his that suit against him, but that was probably the first big time that you saw a CISO kind of being held responsible for a breach like that. Do you think that's going to have is that going to kind of dampen people's desire to say, hey, I'm going to go in and be a CISO somewhere, and be like, well, I don't know now.
Well, I know, in higher ed right now, that is, they're working through that. I know that our board of trustees has our chancellor actually as the responsible party. I know if you do GLBA, if you work with GLBA data, then you have a person, usually the CISO, who is the responsible party, can be legally held, liable. I think that is certainly a pressure. And it is, even in the research space. So at the University of Arkansas, when we do something 800, 171, or we're trying to hit some level of CMMC, and we're signing off on that is usually the CISO that signs off on. And I think in the past, it's been, as you've seen, there's been a couple of universities out there that have been called on the carpet by the federal government for lying and not doing this. And I think that is, has been a wake-up call in higher ed, that, we have had this lax tendency to say, yeah, we've got that, and we don't really have that covered. I think that, going forward, that will continue, because I don't know that, in the past, one of the reasons that I think cyber is in the place that it is today is that there has not been enough accountability. And so, there's been massive amounts of money lost, massive amounts of data lost. The reality is that everybody who's been born and lived, in the United States has had their data stolen already. There's nobody who has not. And just because of all the breaches in the government and the hospital systems and things like that, it's just, and I think, there have, over time, and it's a controversial idea, but over time we have as a country, we have allowed them to start to make this, to monetize cybercrime. And so that has helped fund, a lot of these big attacks. And, if we had started earlier on that and, focused on demonetizing those type of attacks and things like that, I think we'd be in a different place. And I think this is, holding CISOs and board of trustees accountable is, kind of a reaction to that.
Okay.
Well, you kind of touched on AI and things, but what emerging technologies are you most excited about or concerned about from a security standpoint?
From a security, so there's always AIs. That's the easiest answer out there. I think that shifting over to biotech, I'll throw that out there instead of AI, just to be a little different. Biotech right now, we're in that place. Elon is going down that pathway where you can have stuff, put in your body that's going to help you do things. And these are things that, this is not like, it's not an optional thing for some people. These are, my legs don't work, I've had spinal damage, and they're going to fix that with technology. And if, they do that in the same way that the car industry has done its security stuff, it is going to be a very bumpy ride, having, biotech in your body that somebody could potentially hack. Yeah, and do more, do damage.
Wow.
You know,
I didn't even
hold
think
you,
about that.
I
know,
think there's a good movie there, Stephen. I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
like this sounds like a movie idea.
I mean, if you think about the idea of, okay, I have control of your, the chip, right? So I mean, it's all going to be. I mean, even heart, the what is it, the pacemakers today?
Pacemakers.
Right.
They
Yeah.
reach out and they talk to the doctor's office, right? And so
Yeah.
the thing is, if I could take control of your heart monitor and I can say, look, I can destroy it, I can overrun it, I could give you a heart attack right now, or I could stop it from monitoring or pacing your beats. Give me, I need a Bitcoin, right, to prevent that, to let you go. I mean, that's not really, that's not as sophisticated as a system as they are talking about, in some of the other stuff that's going on out there, the brain technology integration point, that could really be something that could be hijacked.
Feels like next week's episode of Black Mirror or something.
Right. So, I mean, that's really my concern. I think that's a really promising technology. It's huge. It's a hugely promising technology for people that, for everybody, right? So, I mean, to replace lost functionality as we get older, to replace lost functionality and things like that. I think that's a huge life improvement for humanity. It just has this really dark side that, of potential risk.
Right.
Well, kind of going through, you talked a little bit about some of the concerns you have. One of the things that we saw, and we'll just call out, was it Gemini? I think that had all those issues, and they kind of had a false start when they launched initially. But listen, they were just doing their best, right? But you know what I found interesting about all of that is it still showed that in these LLMs that they're being trained by us, right? And that it's still input output, right? And if we're putting bad input, you're going to get some of those outputs. But I think something that I've always been kind of interested in, because we do a lot of monitoring in cybersecurity. So from the blue team side, you do a lot of monitoring, or you have something automated doing the monitoring for you. But regardless, there's somebody trying to keep the eyes on the wire. And one of the problems that we see is just some of that stuff becomes white noise, right? And so I'm curious, like some of the issues you may see in like algorithmic bias in AI cybersecurity. I think you may see that even more when you get to like cloud security. But is that something that you see being problematic? But just kind of where they're doing a lot of pattern recognition, and then the AI is kind of bouncing off maybe with ML and just trying to train itself. And I'm just kind of curious if you see any problems besides maybe someone gets worn out and is like, oh, I keep seeing this AI is making the same mistake, and a false positive.
Well, I'm hoping that, in the short term, I think the bias issue is a concern, because, like you're saying, like Gemini, it's on what model they trained it on, right? On what data they trained it on. They trained it on the internet. And that's, we all know how wonderful the internet can be.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. That's all truth.
Right. So, I mean, the bias on like the machine learning components in AI and security, I think, if you think about it like this, right? If you're Walmart and IBM is offering a tool per se, right? An AI component in their SIM, and you're, Walmart, if that was trained on general business, you really don't care about what, the general business model per se. You really care as a giant retailer and an e-tailer. That's what you're focused on. Mm-hmm. And that model may really may emphasize and de-emphasize things that you don't care about, or things that you do care about. Emphasize things that you don't care about that are more, business related issues versus de-emphasizing, the sales or the point of sale issue, right? The things, they're focused on looking at their point of sale systems, right? To make sure that what happened to Home Depot doesn't happen to them. And
Sure.
that, some of the other factors there, which that's not a general business problem. That's more specific to a retail front end. And so when you train one of those models on a general business model for security, you may have some of that bias in there. My hope is that the models are good enough that as they get into your environment and start working, and you can, talk to it, that's white, that's noise, that's a false positive. This is really, you can start, it will learn from your environment and, and start going on there. That's, that's my hope. And I think that the new models are getting better at doing that, getting past the bias piece.
Right.
I think prompt engineering is really, I know there's some people that are anti-prompt engineering, but I think that is really where most, of AI falls short, right? You've got people that, just in the people that I interact with, some people have Chat GPT-4 and they're like, I do so much stuff with it. I've got coding. It's doing this for me and doing all kinds of other stuff. And it's coming out with really great work. And then some are like, well, I can get it to correct my grammar, but it doesn't sound as good as I'd like it to, and it's not as good as Grammarly, and it's not, these type of things. And really, when you look deeper into it, it's prompt engineering, and they don't know. There's so many ways to ask that question. There's so many set up the scenario, and they don't know, they've never been trained in this. Not something we do in school. So, people go in and they say, correct my grammar, : and then they drop a paragraph in there. And then they get back, just that, right? They get back that's been grammatically rearranged and fixed, but it's not like, they talked about the intent of this, make this technical, upbeat, or serious and non-technical, they don't give it any flavor or context. And so what they get out of it is not, not really it's not the best that they could. And I think that applies to the cyber world, and to, doing that in the cyber world as well, as you work with these models, what you can ask it, how you can frame your questions in your, your business model, how you can frame that into what you're searching for and looking for in there is a huge part of the effectiveness of that AI.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, the prompt side of it. So my daughter, who is she's a computer science major in college, and one of the things that she talked about, which by the way, and listen, we're not sponsored by anybody, but I will tell you that Claude's also another good platform. If you're looking for something that's going to help you just more with working with your math or helping you build some base code or something like that. So if you've never used it, I'd go out and look at that. I, like everyone else, I think in the world, has Chat GPT-4, and I agree with you. The learning how to prompt is interesting. But my daughter said she wonders if, will they start doing classes on how to ask questions, right? Which is, to your point, which is the prompting side, right? Because we were responding to an RFP last month. It was a pretty large one, and I just hadn't realized this, but my CFO, who was giving me some pointers on it, he's like, hey, you can tell ChatGPT to use active voice, or you can tell them to be more succinct, or you can tell them to do things like that. So it's a fair point, but I do wonder if as using these these LLMs, these AI models, I'm curious if that will be like a whole new skill set that people have to develop is the prompt side of it. Like that's like when you were in libraries, when you were my age growing up, you had to learn the Dewey Decimal System, right? You had certain things you had to learn, and that was just part of the deal of research. Or Altavis, LexisNexis,
Right.
old terms, but yeah, it's just trying to learn how to use those things. I think it's very interesting that that's kind of a whole new avenue of having to learn something that quite honestly, 4 years ago, that wouldn't have been part of our language at all. So,
I mean, there's a lot of classes out there now, and I know that they've been talking about that being a profession. I think everybody, there's two ways to really look at that too. There's the general prompt engineering that everybody, that you should take in grade school, right? Where you learn how to interact with an AI and some of the nature of that. The prompt engineering that they've been talking about from a professional perspective is not only, when you use AI for your business, not only, creating the appropriate prompts, but managing them over time, right? So as the AI models learn and change, making sure that they're still the most efficient, best prompts for the stuff that you're doing, right? And then setting up prompts for other groups inside of your organization. That's some of the stuff they've been talking about.
It's interesting. So what are some skills and qualities that you consider are most essential for a successful career as a CISO, if in higher education, not just higher education, because you've been on both sides of it. What are some things that you've got some up and coming security engineers? What's some good advice you can give for them as they're rising through the ranks?
Well, so two things, right? I think there's two real, well, it is the role of CISO takes on a lot of it's more of a continuum than a specific role. There are CISOs that have to be very technical. They usually work in small shops and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my advice for those is make sure that you have a good wide understanding of all of IT, and coming up in that, I would, recommend that you do some time as a DBA or, storage administrator and admin some workstations and some servers, and so that you have a good understanding of how infrastructure works, even at the network level. When you get into like the CISO for Walmart or for a large company, IBM or, a large medical company, realistically, you're going to have teams of not only engineers, but teams of architects that are going to help you architect the security posture for your organization. You're going to have risk management teams and things like that. So really it's a communications role as well as just managing the posture and making sure that not only that what the posture that the organization is trying to hit is the posture that that your group is managing, but also making sure that the executives understand, or to the best of to where they need to understand the security posture and have input into that direction.
Well, I think you answered that last question about for cybersecurity professionals starting from the bottom, going up to start off in smaller spaces. So, Rich, did you have any other questions?
I did have a question, and it's to go back to my algorithmic bias question, and because I find it interesting, right? Because if you see in my family, a lot of them are like, "You listen, I don't trust AI," because they're like, "Listen, that AI stuff's gonna kill us one day." So I've got some conspiracy theorists in my family. You should see Thanksgiving. It gets real interesting. They're like, "I hear you're in cybersecurity. They got those chips in you, boy," and I'm like, "Oh boy," But I'm like, "No, not yet." But I will tell you something very interesting. So we're talking to I cannot remember the name of the company, but one of the things that is really big today is it's basically kind of a piece of middleware that basically adds AI capabilities to any of your your cameras, right? So any of your security camera feeds, there are some systems that it comes in through the cloud and it's done naturally and natively through those, custom off the shelf systems. But there's a lot of people who can't afford those, but there's a big market now for that middleware that provides basically that AI piece. So I was talking to this company and they were talking about because it really resonated when you talked about the retailers. But
Right.
what they're doing now is that AI is taking video feed throughout the store, and they said that they can, within an 85% accuracy rate, tell you if someone's shoplifting or not, just from the video. Like how many, and they've got all these different pattern matches, whether it's they put in, like if it's so many of the same item, if they walk with their back to, like they have all of these just really interesting variable inputs that when they get it all in, they're like, this person is shoplifting. And then I'd start thinking about algorithmic bias. I'm like, oh my gosh, what if we started getting bias in these things? I'm just like, this would be horrible. But I don't know. So have you thought about, I know you do as a CISO, you're probably more, you're probably not only more aware, but you're probably more focused on the cybersecurity side of things. But on the security side, the physical security and having these cameras and door access and things like that, what is that relationship between like the public safety, and I'm not sure what they call it where you're at today, but there's usually like a physical safety or a public or operational safety group that has to marry with a cybersecurity. What's it like having to work with those two groups like that, or you would be one and they'd be the other? I'm just kind of curious, and maybe it's the PD for your. What are some of those things, and what are some of the emerging like physical security technologies you're seeing that can kind of help as well?
So I know, our relationship with them is usually a bit on the strained side. We're really, we're more focused, from a CISO's perspective, I'm more focused on privacy, right? So when you introduce that middleware in there, or even when so we do life, health, safety. There's tons of different kinds of cameras on campus. There's UAPD has their camera system. Housing has their camera system. The athletics department has their camera system. They're all monitoring different types of things and, doing stuff like that. And so realistically, and they're focused on their tasks, right? And, my focus on that is privacy. Right, is that, while yes, life, health, safety is important, if somebody falls in an athletic facility, that somebody, slips in a certain area and falls, that we can understand what happened there. And if there's nobody else around, that hopefully it would be nice if somebody could call UAPD and, have emergency services arrive to help them. I think, though, on the other side of that too is, what is, you would not want your child's, video going out onto the internet, right? And you would want the university to protect that. Also, there is the technology on the AI side is concerning, and the video side. I mean, there have been, the technology is rampantly available today to it could be, you could put somebody else's face over me and change my voice as well, and it'd be sharp and as clear. I know I was at a conference like a couple weeks back, and they were talking about, we were looking at AI, some of the AI stuff, and there was a company that had, I don't remember the name of the company, the individual that told the story. There was a company that had lost millions of dollars because somebody had phoned in as the CEO. They had spoofed the number and had something, one of the and there's lots of them. I won't mention the name of them, but there's lots of AI software out there that can learn a person's voice and talk as them, right? As movie stars, as regular people, right? And so they had used one of those, and the CEO called up and basically said, "We need to pay this invoice right now." It was one of those scams. And the lady that took the call was like, "Well, we have a procedure for that. We can't do that, And so the CEO said, "Well, I'll arrange a Zoom call shortly, and we'll do a face-to-face. That way we'll meet that." So a few minutes later, she's invited to a Zoom call, and she gets on the Zoom call, and on the Zoom call is the CEO, the CFO, and I think the COO as well. And they're discussing, the impact to the the organization if this doesn't get paid and all this other stuff. And he's like, "Look, we need to pay this right now." She takes us as a face-to-face. She pays the bill. The next day, the CFO calls up and says, "Hey, why did we spend this money? Spend all this money?" And she's like, "Well, you guys were saying, that we had to pay this invoice." And they unwound it, they went back, and I believe that law enforcement who checked this out said that the group who did this spent about 10 grand to do that. And that was a year or so ago, I believe.
Oh, man.
They were saying that the technology for that, you could do that today for $400. And so that kind of stuff is out there. So that, when you talk about video and stuff like that and putting AI in there, there's just, there's a lot there to be worried about, at least for the CISO. That is just hard. We talked about how do you prevent that? And looking at the systems that are emerging right now to check and see, is this been AI altered? And somebody, I believe at the same conference, they had taken the top 5 paid for solutions and the top 5 free solutions for AI checking, and he got a 98% failure rate on those that were done with AI. And he was talking about how he could do his video and record his video in a certain way and trigger it to say that he was AI when AI had never touched the video. And so that technology is way behind where the AI detection technology is way behind. And so how do you deal with that? As an organization, how do you deal with that? And so I think that's the next big battle we're going to fight. We're already talking about, understanding what true out of band means, right? And making sure that it is true out of band, and that, the way they got into that situation was they had an AI that had a hook. It had an API where they could connect it to Zoom. There's lots of them out there that do that today, for valid purposes and good purposes, not just fraud. But they had, gotten past its borders and had, they had trained it, or not trained it, but they had given it time from video that they had captured online of the CEO and the CFO and all those individuals, and they used it to do that. But so how and she thought that this was out of band, right? This was another connection. It wasn't a phone call. I'm seeing your face, and how do you deal with that? And so I think that we're gonna, there's going to be a lot more procedural stuff put in place and in the technology space as we go forward.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What comes after multi-factor authentication? What's next? It was dual. Now it just keeps going.
Well, and even then, multi-factor, you can beat multi-factor. Not necessarily. I have that all the time. If you send somebody, if they collect your information off the dark web, right? So we monitor the dark web. Probably shouldn't tell everybody that, but we monitor the dark web for our identities. And when we find your stuff out there, we reach out to you and we rotate your password and all of that kind of stuff, let you know. And so even then, when we find your identity on the dark web, it's not just your username and password. It's usually your phone number, bank accounts, all kinds of other stuff that's there. And so what we have a problem with is them texting people. They'll know your password, and then they've got to get you to put in your MFA. And so they'll text you, pretending to be IT, and they're like, your account is going to be shut down. This is maintenance. You've got to change your password. You've got to do this, put in this code, this one-time code, and all that other stuff, right? And they will keep that up until they eventually get you to click or do whatever you need to do to give them access. And then they're off at the races. And so I think that, there's phishing resistant MFA out there now. That's, some things that we're moving to YubiKeys and things like that. Again, with everything like that, there's challenges in the workflow. But that's another issue too, is, proving identity is a challenge.
I mean, I would have thought, a Zoom call would be sufficient, but
Yeah,
that's
it's
the
pretty.
first time I've heard that story, something like that.
There was another guy that did really interesting. It was really interesting. He, and so his thing was AI. He was looking at AI systems. And so he was talking about breaking AI or jailbreaking AI. And so he had taken a large language model, and it had actually, I think he did this at Black Hat last year. He won a prize at Black Hat for doing this. They had a contest to break an AI, jailbreak an AI, and then have it call and get certain information from somebody. And so he used like Taylor Swift or some movie star's voice, so that it would be, potentially noticeable. But he broke this AI, had it talking as, it sounded like Taylor Swift, had him, going through this conversation and asking him questions. And it was really interesting. One of the first things that the AI did when it connected was it said, hey, can you hear me? And the gentleman that the AI had called said, yes, I can hear you. He says, I'm sorry, I've been having problems with my headset all day. It's been pausing and breaking up, which, when an AI has a problem, usually there's an AI pause, all that stuff. So it's already presetting, your expectations. And so you're not even going to think it's AI. You're just going to think, hey, this is the guy that has the problem, or the lady that has a problem with her headset, because we all have experienced that. And so, again, that technology is out there really cheap, and it just needs somebody. That goes back towards, the prompt engineering, right? Is how do you jailbreak AI, and then how do you get it to do those things that you want it to do? He gave another demo of he was going to, and this is the thing that is actually happening, is they're calling up and saying, we've got your children, and pay a ransom and all that other stuff. And he actually jailbroke the AI, and he went through the whole prompt. I mean, it was about 10 pages of prompt that he had done to set this up, and talking about escalation and tension and putting pressure on the person and telling them, telling it what to do when they spoke back. And again, and he played the role of the parent and had the AI, run through that. And it was truly chilling, having it, when he was like, I don't understand what you're saying. It would tell him to shut up, and listen to me. If you want to see him again, you're going to do these things. And it was truly chilling, and it was AI, and set it up right there. So, that stuff's out there right now.
Wow.
So,
That is crazy
stuff. Yeah. There's a lot of great stuff. There's also, a side we're going to have to protect ourselves from on it.
Well, it's kind of funny. I think the earlier part of this episode, you and me and Cassie, we were really talking about some of the more what we would call like traditional ways to break in. It's like brute, kind of brute in, or if we're going to go and go through some other methodologies. And but what's always the most successful for us is, going in and basically, tricking people and social engineering. That's really like the next step of what this is, what you're talking about, right? Using AI to do that. It's pretty interesting. But that last story, I appreciate you giving me something else to worry about in life, because I don't think I had enough. So thanks for that, Stephen.
That's all right.
No, hey, can we find where my kids are? No, but no, I think that's it's great. It's good to get that information out there, because I hadn't even really thought about some of these things. Yeah, I'll tell you the one I did like earlier though is about the biotech. And that's to me that's a scary one for sure. And we had, Cassie, I can't remember who it was. Didn't we have someone else kind of talking about someone? Oh, I think they were talking about a Flipper Zero, and I don't know if that episode's come out or not, but I don't know if you're familiar with like Flipper Zeros, and but they'd used it in. They had messed. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they had done something, and I don't think anybody got hurt from it. But it was in a medical setting, and they got a scare. So, and I'll have to go back and try and find that. So we have to edit this part out. Yeah. There's a device out there, but it was definitely one of those things. I'll have to check and see what it was, and it may not have been that, but there was a device like that someone had used, and but yeah, I mean, being able to go in and take over someone's biotech that they're using, for better their life, that's pretty scary stuff. So is the the social engineering through AI is pretty crazy too. Go I was going
to say asymmetric thinking. That's the tool, and so how do you apply these things to, bad aims? Flipper Zero is there are kids playing with Flipper Zero, going and opening up garage doors and things like that, and cars and stuff. Yeah. And they're just kids. I mean,
I've got a friend. He's a realtor. Realtor, is that how you say it? I know. It's people in that profession. They get real ticky on how did you say the word right? And I'm like, anyway. But he has a Flipper Zero. The only reason he has it in his car is because there's a lot of times he'll have to go to different places and open those locks, and he can just open the locks or get in through the gates with his Flipper Zero if for some reason he doesn't have it or they didn't leave the key for him. And I was like, well, that's concerning that it's that easy. And he's not even in IT. Like he YouTubed how to do this, so.
And now they have the keyless, you can get into your house keyless, Can they get in that way too?
I would think so.
I wouldn't. I think it would depend on the lock, but there's.
Well, maybe some of our viewers can let us know. I'm sure somebody will be like,
I'll stick with the old fashioned,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Stephen. Like Rich said, we've got a lot to think about now.
Appreciate that.
All the interesting things, really. That I have not even heard of or thought about. So thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciated you.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen.
Right. Bye. Thank you for tuning into the NSI podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share. For more information, visit us at nextstepinnovation.com.